in DC doing some work for the organization. So she asked me to come and talk to you, probably because I'm the only Black atheist she knows.
We know a few.
I'm sure you guys do, but I don't think my mom does. But she knows one that she could send into the ring. It's okay. Now, I can give you some basic overview of what why we started the organization, about criminal justice reform, about bail reform, and about where the movement is headed currently. But any super intense legal questions and other stuff like that, I can't answer. Basic questions I can answer, and I have this handy dandy little thing with facts and figures in it, so I can look up little facts and figures as we go along if you want. So to give you a basic understanding of how it works, pre-trial detention, right? There's two types of detention, right? There's pre-trial detention and then detention after you've been found guilty of a crime, post-trial detention. In recent years, there's been a movement to reduce the size of the post-trial prison population, right? It doesn't seem like it, but in the last 30 years, the U.S. jail population has tripled, and 95% of all of that growth isn't people being imprisoned, but actually people being held in jail. So post-conviction for minor crimes, it's your jail versus prison. You're in jail, I believe, for crimes of where you're going to be in prison for up to 18 months, and then after that point, you go to the prison. One of the other things, the other reason they keep the jail is to keep people there before they have been tried, right? Okay, so pretrial detention, it is the practice of holding people, locking people up before they've been convicted of a crime. And where does it come from? Well, on one hand, it comes from the idea that we have to safeguard the community, right? That's what we've been sold as a community. That's part of why we accept it, right? If somebody commits a serious crime, like they're convicted of murdering several people, you don't want that person to be able to post bail. But most people being held in the jail aren't being held for crimes like that. Now, it used to be that they held people even on misdemeanor crimes, meaning I could, okay, there are a couple of different ways that they handle your case once you've been arrested, right? You go through a process. You can be released to pretrial services. You can be released to your own, just show up for your court date, and you can post bail. Now, people, maybe like their first time arrest, not serious offenses, are often given a misdemeanor. They're given either ROR or pretrial. But for lots of people who have previous arrests or who don't meet the requirement for pretrial release or release on their own recognizance, are told that they have to stay in the jail until they post bail. So what that de facto means, right? De facto versus de jure. What that de facto means is, in practice, it's supposed to mean that only motivate people to show up to court. Now, you forfeited this much money, so it's unlikely you're going to skip out on your bail. It's supposed to motivate you, a bad gamble, right? To show up for your trial and see it through to the end. But what it actually does is penalize people who are poor, right? Low income, of all races, but especially here in Pima County, we have a huge overrepresentation, underrepresentation of white people compared to the population, overrepresentation of every other segment of the population within our jail. And these people are the ones that are the most often affected by pretrial detention. They're the most often to have a list of factors that make them what's a good word for it? I don't want to call it. You would consider them an unsafe risk by those standards. Now, we as human beings understand that no, those are our human brothers and sisters. They have complicated lives that have led them to this moment. So while safeguarding the community is a real concern, most of these people aren't people that the community needs to be safeguarded from. Their only crime is not having enough money to bail themselves out. So how do they determine who gets pretrial, who gets bail, they give you something called a risk assessment tool. The RAT, for short, is a decision-making rubric. Now, this is not something that I admit to most people, but I was at one time a probation officer, much to my eternal shame. I was a probation officer, and I worked with the risk assessment tool. It's very basic. It sounds complicated, like they're really doing some deep psychology to figure out who is, and it's like 10 or 11 questions, and it's unfair to people who have been raised in the system. It's unfair to people who live below the poverty line. It shows because the questions that are being asked are skewed, right, to penalize those people. Okay, so in recent years, the pretrial folks have been relying more heavily on the RAT. Okay, so that requires me to go back a little. So there's been a lot of people have started speaking out about this. There's lots of community bail funds like the one that we started here in Tucson, Arizona. And we started ours here because they have long-standing ones in places like Detroit and in New York City that have done a lot of really amazing work to get prisons shut down, to get the pre-bail system altered, right? And so I'm not sure, have any of you guys heard of Khalif Browder? He was a young man who at the age of, I want to say 15, was accused of a crime that he said he didn't commit. The bail was $300. His family could not afford to bail him out. Because it's New York State, they kept pushing his trial back and pushing his trial back. And they kept him, a child, in an adult prison in isolation for 2 years, I believe, or 3 years. Yes, it was torture. And when he was finally released, he was able to sue the state and won some money, but the psychological damage was already done, and he eventually committed suicide. And his case became a really big turning point for people talking about this bail reform, how ridiculous it is that someone who can't afford $300, someone who is probably innocent of their crime, who wants to fight the crime or fight the charges because they say I'm innocent and that's the way our system's supposed to work. Because if he had taken a deal and accepted guilt, which people are often tempted to do, they'd have let him out, right? They'd have let him out. He'd have had to pay his fines and do probation or do whatever. But if you want to fight your charges and you can't afford your bail, you have to stay in jail. Meaning people cop to pleas all the time, regardless of whether they're guilty or not, regardless of whether it's a good deal or not. Now, when people are out of jail, they have the freedom to fight harder. They get reduced sentences. It's a statistical fact that's buried somewhere in this paper. But it's the fact that when people have the freedom to fight, to get a lawyer, even a city attorney or legal aid lawyer, and fight the county's overzealous prosecutors, then those people are more likely to get an outcome that's fair for them. Okay. Well, so after Khalif Browder, there was a lot of discussion about changing this, making bail reform, and there was actually, I believe, a grant given to our Pima County Jail, and the legal aid office has given lots of lip service to all the different ways in which they are trying to change the situation we have with bail, so that it's not just penalizing the poor people who can't afford bail anymore. But how are they doing that? Well, they're leaning more heavily on that RAT. So really, it's not. So in principle, it sounds like they're making reforms. It sounds like they're making changes. They're giving lip service to reform. But in practice, it's the same freaking thing, right? Yes, go ahead.
Do you remember any sample items from this form? Any questions?
Me personally?
Yeah, just,
from when I gave it to people.
No.
Oh God, 10 years ago. It's simple things like, are your parents divorced?
Oh.
Have you ever been charged with a misdemeanor? Have you ever lived? Have you ever been homeless? Or basic questions like that.
Sure.
So for your average middle class or even working class white person, the answer to all those questions may be no. But for other people, right? Your lower class, your poor people, your racial minorities, everybody else who that is not, who maybe does know someone who has been arrested, who has been in the foster care system, who has been involved in these systems at different times, they are automatically given it's considered a point on the scale of antisocial personality, or what's it, antisocial, it's antisocial. I don't know why. I usually am really good talking to people. That's why they send me in to talk to people, but antisocial,
personality disorder?
No, it's antisocial attitudes and behaviors. Okay? Antisocial attitudes and behaviors. They're testing to see if your attitudes and behaviors are antisocial. And it's very easy to score at least 1 or 2 points. It's harder to score 17 points. But even if you score 3 or 4, even if you have previous, that doesn't mean anything about the person you are now. Even if you have involvement from 10 years ago, that'll be held against you. If you have a history of drug abuse in your past, it doesn't have to be what you're doing now. It has to be what the RAT says, right? And if you answered yes, then that box gets checked, and it doesn't, and all the qualifications around it don't matter. Those nuances aren't there. Okay. Okay. So the RATs overpredict criminal behavior and criminal attitudes because they're so simplistic and it's easy. So then if they're using the RATs as the reason not to give people bail or to hold people until trial, then we're still stuck in the same pattern. The other thing we found in Pima County is that when we initially started, this was just an event through Black Lives Matter. Every year, different organizations do a thing called Mama Bailout, meaning they raise funds and they bail women out for Mother's Day. And then they do the same thing for Father's Day. And then they do it again for Christmas. So then it started to become like a realization, people need to do this a lot, right? So then my mom started looking into, instead of it just being an event, a fundraising event, how could we start servicing the community of Tucson? But then as we did that, what we found were even more complicated problems, right? Like within the jails, everything costs money now because they've been privatized. Everything costs money. You get like one free video call a week. You no longer get actual visits or talks. It's like video calls, and then you have to buy a card and you have to put money on it if you want to use the card. Your family has to do all of these different things just to keep in contact with you while you're in jail. So they've created all of these barriers that make people less interested in getting involved in what's going on. Lots of people don't know what's going on in our jails and our courts. We read articles in the paper, the headline says something that sounds like, oh good, they're handling that. And then we move on to the next problem. But the problems aren't actually being solved. They're just getting new names. Okay, so what's happening in Arizona? Pretrial detention has not declined in Arizona, despite all of the reforms that have been talked about over the years, all of the different ways that they were going to curb this pretrial detention. We still have a huge problem with pretrial detention. Money bail still serves as a major barrier and is often prescribed even after the conditions on the RIT, even after they've recommended that a person be released on ROR or pretrial. They still are tending to err on the side of giving people high bail. And I should also mention that we also have a problem with our prosecutors overcharging people. So say I get in a fight, we start yelling at each other. Okay, they call the police come, I'm screaming, and they say, you need to leave. And I don't know, I throw some water on the floor, throw water across the room or something. Well, now I have committed felony assault, right? Or attempted.
You're committed, or you're charged with?
I'm charged with assault. I'm charged with assault. Now, you're right. Maybe they'll drop those charges later, but if I'm charged with physical assault, then that makes it a fucking felony. And that means that they can charge me, my bail can be as high as $10,000, $50,000, insane bails. So the problem with overcharging, so mostly what I'm guilty of maybe is like disorderly conduct, and maybe I need to take a diversion program. And since I'm lucky enough that I have a parent who's an attorney, right? And I have a little bit of money and connections in the community, I could probably get that diversion plea. But what if I don't have those things? Now I'm charged with a felony assault, which makes me sound dangerous, which makes me not somebody that you want to bail, when really all I was angry and immature. Right? And these are the kind of things that people are facing. They're being charged with. So you're hitting someone with these huge felonies. You're giving them a bail that's really high. And then you're saying they have to sit in jail until they can either fight those charges and get to court, or sometimes if your attorney puts enough pressure on, we found also that a lot of the attorneys in the public defender's office don't put in much pressure about getting their clients out as they should. It's not just a problem with the prosecutor side. It's a problem with the entire system. The prosecutor side, the defender side, the judge's side, the Pima County Sheriff's side, the people who run the jail, the privatized jail system, every time you start to move in, you find out that the problems are a lot more complicated. So that's what this organization is about. We started with just working on alleviating bail and getting people out, and we do that. We bail people out. They don't have to jump through a ton of hoops. They don't have to. They have to, of course, we have to be reasonable, right, about who we can and can't bail out. But a lot of people that pretrial services won't take the gamble on. We will take the gamble on. And so far, we haven't lost, right? All of our money has either come back because the person saw their case through to the end and ended up having to go back to jail, or was able, and this has happened more often, able to fight their charges and get a better plea deal that allowed for them to not have to do any prison time, right? But like, that's only part of the problem. Something else we need is more people keeping an eye on the courts, keeping an eye on what's going on, asking, accompanying people, sitting in, we're supposed to eventually start a program called a Court Watch, which is something we're working towards. The goal is to empower average everyday people like us sitting in this room to just, if we have the time, go sit in court, watch what the judges are doing, keep track of what's going on, find out what kind of things the judges are saying to people in open court, find out what's going on in your community with your justice system, right? Because our justice system is pretty freaking unfair. It's really unfair, and that's even, it's not just in big cities and big towns. I mean, the system here is messed up, and it is such a moneymaker that they don't want it to be reformed. And the only way we're going to reform it is if we pay attention and get involved in what's going on with the courts. And that's kind of what Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund is about. It's not just about getting people out, even though that is like our main mission. We wanted to do take a concrete action that improved the quality of lives now, not in 6 years, by throwing money at it and suing, not in 12 years, not in 15 years. Now, what can we do now? But Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund has also taken on trying to find out what happened. There's been 2 deaths this year at the Pima County Jail. 2 deaths. And the Sheriff's Department has clammed right up. They will not give details. Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund is coming after them and asking them for answers and trying to get them to talk to us. And I mean, what we need is to grow, and what we need is volunteers, is fundraisers, is all of that stuff, but we need people to know we exist. We need people to know we exist, and that we can do these things that we're talking about doing aren't totally out of reach. I'm skeptical. I'm actually one of those people that's such an anarchist. I think that voting is a sham that they give us, just like any other fucking religion, just like any other religion or team sport, and they get you all excited. Oh, the Democrats have done this, the Democrats are doing that. Oh, now it's an impeachment. Oh, it's so exciting. This thing is happening. And it's all just sports. It's all just team sports. We stopped having a democracy, well, before it even started, actually, right? So the concept that we ever had one, to me, is a fairy tale. So I don't have a lot of faith in I don't even have faith in city politics, but I do have faith in us as individual people to put pressure on our systems that are there for us, right? And to make them work the way we want them to work in this fucking town. We don't have to have a system that is unfair, unjust, that penalizes the poor, that penalizes the brown. We don't have to accept that as reality in Tucson. We do accept it, but we don't have to. This is a town where we still have the ability to put the pressure on people to make change. And that's, what Tucson Second Chance Bail Fund is totally about. It started as this little thing, and it keeps getting, because the problem is so fucking big, you think it's a little problem, but it turns out the problem's much bigger than you realize. I should have stuck with all of the statistics and stuff. But if you guys have questions, about what it is we do, or why I'm here, what kind of things you can do to get involved, or whatever like that, or.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
I mean, this may not be relevant because you're working in the system that exists, and you did identify yourself as an anarchist, but as you're talking, I kept asking myself what I would be really curious to know is, what do you think would be like a better system?
Yeah.
What would be I don't presume.
I literally, you're asking me to conceive of something that is beyond my scope of understanding.
Yeah,
what does the universe look like? Tell me. Tell me, as an ant that can only see this much of it, what does the fucking universe look like? I don't know what a new and more just system will look like. I just know that this isn't it. And I don't think it's a matter of reforming it. I think it's a matter of dismantling it. Now, I'm also a pragmatic person. I understand most of you guys aren't that radical. You don't want to see it all burn. I want to see it burn. I really do. I want to see it all fucking burned to the ground. And people don't understand, and I'm serious about that. But I get it. I can't just do it myself. It would have to be a mass movement, and most people don't want to see it burn. So, what we can do is do the work we can and put as much pressure as we can here in this town. I really believe the solutions that we're going to be facing in the next 10 and 15 years are going to be more about region and what kind of infrastructure you have in your town versus that's besides the point. That's not about the Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund, but part of what small grassroots organizations like us, what we're doing by being funded, not by grants and not by gifts from larger organizations that we're beholden to, right? We're funded by the people of Tucson. We're funded by fundraisers. We're funded by us. So we have the freedom to do it our way, and we don't have to kowtow to, politics. That sounds bad. That makes it sound like we're dictators. We're trying to do the fairest and most reasonable things without all the red tape. And I think that those kind of organizations are going to be more important as we see, structural change, the unavoidable structural change that comes from the fact that we're living in the fucking apocalypse, So that's, yeah, but just keep living your life and driving your car like 5 years from now isn't gonna happen.
Do you have any people in Phoenix?
Do we have any people in Phoenix? No, this isn't
Tucson.
Yes, it's a small. We're the first organization in the state of Arizona. They're trying to build one in Phoenix, but I don't know that they've figured it out yet. I think they have the name of an organization, but they haven't really built an organization yet.
It seems to me if you're going to hold people's feet to the fire, it's got to be up there in that legislature. To get things done.
I think that's a waste of time, actually. Yeah. I actually think that's a waste of time. You know what Phoenix is? Phoenix has always been Phoenix since the Barry Goldwater days. You know that Phoenix is going to fuck us over. You know it's going to be obstructionist. So fuck Phoenix. Let's do some guerrilla campaigning. That's what I think. That's just me. You know what I mean?
Like your organization is interested in lobbying.
Huh?
Yeah,
well, I cannot speak for my mother, who is actually running the organization. I'm just the person they sent to come talk to you wild atheists.
You're not, you're anti-lobbying your organization.
I personally am anti-lobbying.
I don't think they're getting there.
But I think we're still.
Organization using lobbying or not?
I don't want to speak for the overall organization. The organization is still developing its mission, but.
So the vision is.
They're also a C3, so C3s don't lobby.
Right, that's what I thought.
So they would have to create a separate.
Are you able to give us any? I mean, sometimes people want to burn everything down, and then that's part of how we got Donald Trump.
No.
So
no.
Sometimes hearing specific facts about specific actual actions that people in your organization have actually done can be very helpful. Can you tell us any statistics about how many people your organization has gotten out of jail early?
That I can't. My mom would be the one who would have to tell you that. She knows those facts. But what I do know is it's not as many as we would like to get out because the bails are so freaking high that a $10,000 bail, coming up with that means that we can't bail out. We can bail out like one person at a time until the money comes back. I think right now we're at a point where we can bail out maybe 2 people at a time until the money comes back, but it's not realistically because of the problem of overcharging. We would need a much bigger sum to have as much of an impact as we would like to, but we're having an impact. That's
every time you do that, you presumably are obtaining, person months of freedom for someone, and then you roll the money over and you do it again.
Yes, and all of our money has come back. That much I do know. That every single person that we have bailed out, even though the final outcome for some of them wasn't great, they still had that period of freedom, and they still had the option to fight their charges and do as best they could under their circumstances. And that's what we're trying to give people,
Give them a little bit of fairness in an unjust system.
In a very unjust system, and a system that grinds them down and keeps charging them money and then charges them with extra crimes for not having money to pay off the first crime, right?
Yeah. Essentially, it's a debtor.
This question might be beyond the scope of what you're dealing with, but you did mention something that sounded familiar, and I'm trying to remember the specifics, but I remember reading an article just this month, within the last month, that talked about these risk assessments. What was the tools?
Yeah.
And it was nice. And it was talking about how in a lot of states people are performing it by replacing it with more risk assessment tools. Basically, the problem, people went, well, it's not that the risk assessment tools are the problem, it's that they aren't good enough, and they're coming up with more complicated and essentially computerizing the system and coming up with algorithms that look at all these risk factors, and then they give these 2 people in the courtroom, give these risk assessment a score to a judge who often doesn't know all the things that went into it and don't have proper training. Do you know if any of this is happening in Arizona where people are trying to computer? Because one of the problems, of course, with algorithms is you sometimes create racist feedback loops, where basically you go, oh, here's a risk assessment tool, and it said that these people were going to be risky bets, and oh look, after we put them in jail and then they got back out, there was some more crimes somehow for some reason, and then so it creates this feedback loop of where the prediction seems to reinforce itself. So they double down on the scores that went oh, these things are going to cause criminality, therefore let's enforce that some more. Do you know if Pima County or if Arizona is engaging in any of that sort of stuff? Because you mentioned that there's been some reform that's it's just more risk assessment.
Yeah, the reform was a reform to the bail system. They were supposed to do less of it, and they got rid of bail for misdemeanor crimes. But then what happened? They started overcharging people. Now they're being charged with felony crimes instead of misdemeanors, right? And so they're being charged with higher bills for more serious crimes when they used to be charged for misdemeanors and held. So, and then a revision to the RATs. I'm forgetting what exactly was what was involved last year when Legal Aid made their announcement about all the stuff that they were doing.
I was also curious, specifically, if you heard people talking about computerizing, because that's the thing that makes me go.
Well, no, I don't know about that.
Judges just getting a readout.
Well, I can tell you what my job was when I worked in the Superior Court, which that's already what I did.
Right.
So when I wasn't a field officer. I was what you call a pretrial investigator. So I would, if you came into my office, it was because you had been found guilty of a crime. Once you were found guilty of a crime, I would do a background investigation into you. I would dig up all the old files on you if you if you had previous crimes, if you'd committed crimes in other states. I'd get a printout of every crime you ever committed and any police reports on you, and I'd go through them all and I'd compile them into Cliff Notes. I'd interview any family members I could. I would interview victims of the crime if it was a crime with victims.
Right.
I interviewed all of those people, and I sifted through all of that data, and then I compiled it into about a 25-page report, which acted like Cliff Notes for the judge, including my risk assessment,
Right.
which was just a one-page printout that went in to the Cliff Notes. And basically, because the judge has to judge a whole bunch of cases all the time.
They're not going to read the 25 page, they're going to read the 1 page.
Well, yeah, so you read the 25 pages or read 1,000 pages.
Right.
So the 25 pages is a happy compromise. Did the judges actually read my reports? Sometimes. You know, did I feel that most of the judges in the Superior Court should be making decisions about whether people went away forever or how long they served? No, I didn't. It was a hard job, you know. I would say a lot of the Superior Court judges were nutty as fucking fruitcake. But think of every lawyer you know. Only the most ruthless ones get on the bench to be judges. So yeah, it makes sense, right? Think of all the morally corrupt lawyers you know, not the good ones like my mom. Think of the skeevy ones, and think how cutthroat you have to be to make it to the Superior Court bench. And those are the people we're trusting to make decisions for people's lives, you know. Anyways, it was a hard job. And if you do any work within that system, or I don't know, that's not true. Maybe some of you guys do work within that system. For me, working within that system, it became clear to me why I could no longer work in that system and how complicit I was with a system I found to be nauseating, you know, unfair, unjust, cruel, insensitive, and unethical. You know, it was, so I had to get out of that. But it was just my job every day, every single day. There is a miscarriage of justice going on in somebody's life. It could be a little one, like getting a ticket they don't deserve, or it could be a big one, like being charged with a felony they didn't commit. And we've ceded that power. We've ceded that power to a police state.
Well, in this group, we had a public defender. We have an assistant state attorney general.
Okay.
They're not here tonight.
I'm sure they'd have a lot of arguments to say, arguments with what I've said, you know, which they're allowed to. We're in post facts. Facts don't mean anything anymore, so fuck it.
What are the average bails that you're paying for people?
I think the average bail, the lowest bails that we're able to pay are between $5,000 and $10,000. But like I said, usually we can only bail one, maybe two people out at a time. So if that gives you any sense of it. Even though we as an organization have done a lot of fundraising, it's like it takes a lot of money to bail out one person. So, but the beauty of our organization is that we don't intend ever to be, what's it, a 501, the other kind of C4. We don't want to be an institution, you know. My mom currently has a small office because she can't work out of her house, but the goal isn't to be, and the goal is to help the reform until there is no need for us. And then we won't do this anymore. I don't really do it that much anymore anyways. But but then my mom and my sister and all the people that help them at the Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund won't have to do it anymore, you know? It's an organization I'm really proud to be a part of. I wouldn't come and talk to you guys about it if I didn't believe in it, even for my mom, which she knows. So, and I feel like I didn't maybe do the best job, but I just give you guys a basic overview of what's going on and a sense of what we do. I hope that I was able to do that. I hope it was helpful.
Did anyone else have any other questions?
Other questions?
You guys have a presence on the web?
We do. Haha. That is a question that I can't answer.
If you check our Facebook page,
Yeah.
we have the event for the fundraiser, and it's got links in there.
Yeah,
Great,
absolutely.
great, okay, good.
You can check the page. In
Oh
the
no,
events,
totally. I'm
ongoing
glad that I
event,
could do it.
our
I hope that I
fundraiser
was
for that.
helpful and informative.
Question.
Yeah.
So basically your organization's primary focus is a source for bail money.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And as but it's become more complicated because as we started trying to bail people out, we found all these bigger endemic problems, like the overcharging, like they went around us and started being like, well, we're not going to charge bail anymore except for felony cases. Okay, well that's great. Then why is it that we still have these packed jails, right?
so do you interact with the legal system?
Not. I mean, yes, of course. We contact people's attorneys. We try and talk to people's family members. It's more of a, think of it as like a holistic approach. Right? Like when you go to the doctor nowadays, it used to be you go to one doctor for this and one doctor for that and one doctor for this. But now it's you go to one doctor and they try to have all these different people, different connections. So the goal of Tucson Second Chance Community Bail Fund is eventually to be able to offer outreach. Do you know what I mean? But to do that, we have to, we have to examine the courts. We have to watch what our courts are doing and what the needs of the people who are being trapped in the system are. Two, we have to, in my opinion, we have to stay connected, of course, to lawyers and the courts to know what they're doing, but not become
Part of the system?
yes, not be co-opted by them. That's the thing we're trying to avoid, because that's what happens to grassroots organizations like this, right? They get co-opted by the mainstream and then they lose their importance and power. So while it's important to have relationships with all of the different components, our mission is different. Is on the side of the person seeking, on the side of the person who needs the most support, on the side of the people who are the most vulnerable in this situation, on the side of the least powerful in this situation. Do you know what I mean?
So let's say I cannot raise bail. I go to you and say, I need help.
Yeah, you
Then
contact us.
then what do you do?
We would go through the process. You'd get an assessment. We would talk to your attorney and also make sure stuff like that you have a place to stay. We're not going to be as strict as the courts are about where you stay. We're not going to be as strict about what kind of job you have. We're not going to make demands like that you have to go drop every Monday, meaning you got to take 5 buses to get there and come up with the money to do it. Does that make sense to you? Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make some basic sense. We're going to talk to you. We're going to find out what your situation is. Like one gentleman, he had previously a really bad history, but he had 10 years of nothing, and he had a sick wife who he was the main caregiver for. So while pretrials would see him as not a good risk because of that previous drug use and a recent like maybe relapse or rearrest or whatever, we took a gamble on him and he was able to get out. He was able to take care of his wife because we were able to look at the bigger picture in the way that the court couldn't look at it. Does that make sense? We could see the gap of using. We could see that he really was with his wife. His wife talked about how important it was for him to be there. So it was different than just giving you a risk assessment and saying yes or no, you are not likely to reoffend. Instead of making our assessment that way, we do a more holistic assessment, if that makes sense.
Do you have a list of people who ought to be in a hospital rather than in jail? Yeah, I'm talking about mental health issues.
No, I don't think that hasn't been a issue so far. But honestly, that again is a question for my mom, who does more of the administration day to day of running the organization. I think that the mental health issue is more complicated because there's, anyways. Yeah, it's a more complicated issue.
Question with the risk assessment. So are the questions asked of the person?
Yes.
And so, but do you have a way to check if they're lying? Like if you ask, hey,
self-reporting,
have you been homeless, and they say no, like you have no way to check to see if they've actually never been homeless before, right?
No, you don't. You don't have a way to
I'm
check
just
it.
imagining someone thinking, who doesn't know the system, who thinks they can get sympathy by saying, well, I've been homeless, it was really rough, and then they get, thrown in jail. They didn't
I mean, you guys are asking questions that, I think you're